The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Sarah MacKenzie is the founder and host of Read Aloud Revival, a podcast and website committed to helping parents build a family culture around reading aloud. She's the author of Teaching from Rest and the Read Aloud Family, and she's also working on her own picture books. She's one of my favorite people to talk to. I think you're going to love hearing what she has to say. Sarah MacKenzie, I'm so happy to have you on the Habit Podcast.
Oh, Jonathan, it is an absolute pleasure to be here.
I love your podcast. I love everything you do. I love the ways that you have reinvigorated Read Aloud culture. So thank you for what all you've done with the Read Aloud Revival. I think it's just great.
Well, thank you. You know, it's interesting. It's kind of one of those cases of scratching your own itch, for lack of a more savory metaphor there. But the idea is, of trying to figure out what's most inspiring to you, and then like problem solving your own things, and then realizing there's a whole bunch of other people out there who are inspired by the same thing and also have the same pain points. That's kind of the story of Read Aloud Revival, I think. So that's been kind of fun for me.
Yeah. Well, I've been interested to realize the extent to which writers benefit from audiobooks or read alouds. I've had more than one author on the Habit Podcast comment on the fact that listening to audiobooks is part of their process. And I just wanted to spend a little time discussing with you why writers need to listen to books out loud and to stories out loud.
Yeah, this is so interesting to me too, because I think until I really actually sat down and thought about it, what we're actually doing when we read language out loud, that we're, reading the words from the page and then speaking them out loud with our mouths, we don't really even realize that a rhythm of language is heard. It's not seen. So if you have like a tricky sentence or a tricky paragraph, you don't know what's working, the quickest way around that is to read it out loud, because then your ears picks it up. One of the authors I've talked to, she's a middle grade writer, Laura Martin, and she was a teacher before she started writing full time. And she told me that she really believes kids who want to be writers should be listening to more audiobooks than they should be reading them, because that is how you get the rhythm of the language and those sophisticated, correct language patterns sort of just as a part of your DNA almost, right? Because you're just listening to them and absorbing them, and then your language comes out in a more rhythmic way with better cadence. And
I completely agree with that. I don't think. I mean, I'd heard you say that before, and when you said that, that was the first time I put it together. How true that was. It's also, I think, reading aloud reminds us that story is what's the word I'm looking for? Story precedes writing. So as much as I love books, as much as I love writing. Story goes deeper than writing. Writing's artificial, and story is not artificial, right? I mean, whether we could write or not, we'd be telling stories.
Yeah, where actually, if we really think about that, then the writing itself is just the what's the word I'm looking for? Like the vehicle for getting the story from one human soul to another human soul, and the writing is like the vehicle that does that.
Yeah.
But the story itself sort of lives outside of the printed words. Yeah, you're right. I think listening to good language read out loud reminds us that there's this thing that lives outside of the pages and the letters and the construction of a sentence itself, right?
Yeah. I think it's helpful to reflect every now and then on what a strange and artificial process writing is. I mean, if a baby, if you left a baby, with a I mean, babies grow up with families, they're going to learn how to talk and tell stories naturally. But they're not going to naturally, I mean, nobody sits down with a baby and says, okay, baby, here's how you talk. Okay, baby, here's how you tell a story. But if the baby wants to start writing...
There might be some intense parents out there. I don't know.
Right. Maybe so, yeah. But the baby's not going to pick up on writing unless somebody teaches them to write, because it is, an artificial thing. And that sounds, we usually use artificial to be a negative, a pejorative term. I mean, it's just a fact. It's just not something that comes natural to us, writing.
Well, and that's when I think the word vehicle might actually be more helpful than artificial, even, because then we realize it's for something. There's a purpose for the writing, right? Like it's artificial, but it's for a good purpose, and it has to get from one soul to another somehow. So it's interesting. I think that's true. And I also think, I can tell when in my own writing, when I am struggling with a spot, or even if I'm not struggling, let's say I've finished an essay and I think it's done and it feels good to me, and I read it out loud, I will catch at least 5 more things reading it out loud to myself than I did the 100 times I scanned it with my eyes. So you just pick up on, and I think part of that is just that when you're reading with your eyes, you're skipping over the connector words, and you're skipping over a lot. You're reading quickly, whereas when you're reading it out loud, every single word has to be spoken in order with the proper cadence. And so like the errors just, it's like they have neon on them kind of when you're listening. Right. Like a neon sign. Yeah. This is a problem.
Especially if you can get somebody else to read what you've written back to you.
That's so good. Oh my goodness. So I don't want to jump ahead too much, but some of my latest writing projects, I've had my kids read out loud to me. And that's when I noticed, oh my goodness, that does not even make sense. Or they read it with such the wrong intonation, and that I realized that's not nearly as obvious to the reader as it was to me writing it. Whatever you thought you were communicating, you're not communicating, which is the problem with every writer, right? Because we think we're communicating clearly. Yeah. And we don't really notice where we're not. Yeah,
the curse of knowledge. I mean, every writing problem, I mean, maybe I shouldn't say every, almost all writing, very few writing problems are a result of a writer being ignorant and knowing too little. It's that they know too much. They already know what they're trying to say, and so they write it down and think, I guess that's what that says. And so I find it helpful to remind writers, you made this mistake not because you're an idiot. It's just you actually were a little too smart. You forgot what it's like not to know what it is that you're trying to say here. And I've heard it say that the best teachers remember what it's like to be ignorant, and that's why they're able to teach.
That's good. Well, it's like kind of with parenting too, because you feel that way with you can really empathize with your kids and reach them better if you can remember what it feels like to be 5 and be trying to make your bed and nothing works and everything's frustrating. Can you tell what we did this morning? Yeah. And so if we can like remember what it feels like to be in those shoes, then we make better decisions in how we interact with people. And I guess that's true in our real life, like in our, flesh and blood life. And it's also real in the way we interact with our readers through the words we're putting on paper.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that reminder. Okay. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes here. I know what I wanted to ask you about. So one of the themes in your writing and speaking is the way that reading aloud builds culture, builds a community. I want to talk about that a little bit and then talk about how that applies to a writer. So the floor is now yours.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I've noticed, and this is kind of why I started to get a little bit fanatical, it might be the right word, about reading aloud, is because I had been reading with my kids. So I have 6 kids, and the first batch of children, I had been reading with them bedtime stories and, just like most people read with their kids who aren't reading to themselves yet. Mm-hmm. And I heard this very inspiring talk by Andrew Podowa from the Institute for Excellence in Writing about how the best way you can nurture your kids to be good communicators is to read aloud a lot with them. Mm-hmm. And then he also mentions memorizing poetry. But he was so inspiring when he was talking about reading aloud so much. Like, you can't read aloud too much. And this is why it was so inspiring to me that I started reading aloud just a ton with my own kids. And all the things that he had said would happen, like their increased vocabulary, their better reading comprehension, their ability to write better, all those things did happen. The thing that floored me, though, was this sense of community, this sense of culture, family culture. Like, we had our own inside jokes. We would laugh at, kind of like when your whole family sees a movie and then people are quoting that for, there's like a quote or an inside joke or something funny that your child did as a toddler that becomes like the family joke, around Thanksgiving or whatever. It's that all the time around these books that we were sharing. And I realized as my older kids got older, now our oldest ones are all in high school, that especially on those days when we're having a hard time remembering that we're allies, if we're on the same team, it's when you sit down to read a story, you're rooting for the same characters, you're holding your breath at the same moment, you're crying or you're moved in the same moment. And it's like it reminds us all who we are in a different way than I think we could if we just tried to, grit our teeth and bear it or like the moment or try to connect. It just gives us this really, it's almost like a bonfire, right? It like draws us all in. We all circle around it and we kind of remember why we like each other.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. And so for the writer, I really think it's helpful to remember, because most of us when we write, we're sitting alone in a room, and you can forget. It's possible to forget that you are participating in a community when you're writing. I mean, hopefully you are doing something that's going to connect to a reader. Hopefully we'll connect readers to each other. And I find, reading aloud, it helps me to remember, this is a communal thing here. Books aren't just something that you make alone and that you consume alone, but stories is something that connects us. I find that very helpful.
Well, and it's culture making, in a different way. I mean, if we think about your books, Jonathan, the Wilder King series, just as an example, if you think of these families that are sitting down to read The Bark of the Bog Owl together after dinner, or over a picnic, or listening to an audiobook while they're on their road trip, or wherever they're listening to it, that story ends up being this culture maker within their family, this opportunity, this new way for them to see each other and love each other better. That feels to me like this tremendous responsibility and this amazing, precious gift that you're able to do alone in a room to people you've never met and you won't ever meet. It's kind of amazing.
It really is amazing, and it's a gift that I try not to take for granted. But even for people who they're writing for it, things that aren't going to get published. It's still. Even when you're sitting alone working, you're still putting out. You're like that spider in Walt Whitman's poem, who's casting out those threads, hoping that one of them is going to catch, and he can move on. He can connect to the wider world.
Yeah.
And so I love that reminder that.
Well, that kind of reminds me too of this idea that even if whatever you're writing isn't ever going to see anybody else's life, like anybody else's eyes, no one's going to see it, and it's not going to get published, and maybe it's just something you wrote for yourself. One of the things I've noticed in my own writing life is I'm just a better human being when I'm writing regularly. And I think it's because, we were made to love God and love each other, right? And so every time we write, when we sit down and we're putting words on paper, that's what we're doing. We're kind of making sense of this world where there are people who are hurting or who frustrate us or who delight us, the joy. I mean, we're doing that thing where we're taking this world God made and these people God put in it, and we're writing about them or thinking through whatever our experiences are. I just feel like it is a practice of love, really, to sit down and write, regardless of whether anyone's going to see it. Then I emerge from that experience a better human being, better able to love God and love the people I'm going to encounter.
Yeah. I love that observation. By the way, you can add this to your pile of reasons to encourage people to read aloud. The idea of sitting alone in a room in a chair and reading silently to yourself is a relatively recent development, as I'm sure you know. So much so that in the Confessions, Augustine remarks that, I think it's Ambrose, he's surprised, or he thinks it's remarkable enough to write down in his book that Ambrose could read without moving his lips. That's pretty, that's amazing to me. That just, I had this memory just now surfaced that I haven't thought about for years. But I remember being in a second grade classroom when I was young. I was a first grader, and I was sitting there reading a book silently to myself. And one of the boys in class said, "What are you doing staring at those words?" And I said, "I'm reading it." And he said, "No, you're not reading it because I can't hear you." And I remember kind of staring at him being like, "But I'm reading it inside of me." But it was such a interesting, I realized at that moment, of course, so that I'd start moving my mouth because I wanted to prove that I could read, of course, because I was in first grade, nothing if not very self-centered, right? So, yes. That's amazing. So you were like Ambrose and he was like Augustine.
Yeah, I guess so. Oh boy, we could really dive into that, but let's not.
Okay. One more thing about reading aloud. And dialogue, it helps dialogue writing so much. Reading aloud equips you for doing dialogue if you're a writer, even more so than listening to actual conversations does. Because if you were to transcribe a conversation, that would not be good dialogue.
Okay.
And so, I mean, obviously...
It makes so much sense to me, but I don't know if I've ever really thought of it like that. Of course, that's the advice I always hear as a writer. Listen to how people talk to write. And if you're writing for teens and you listen to a few teens talk, you think, I don't really think I want to put that as... I don't really know if that is even going to translate well. Will anybody even know what they're saying?
Yeah. No, but I mean, I think it is true that you definitely have to listen to the way people actually talk, but it's super helpful to read written dialogue out loud that works and begin to understand the difference between good written dialogue and you have to do a lot of work to written dialogue to make it sound like natural speech. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll probably it's probably time for us to move on to this conversation. But I will. The last thing I want to say is, I've got a PhD in literature, and that certainly didn't hurt my writing ability. But where I really learned how to write and to tell stories was from people telling stories. It was I had a family of people who, my extended family, everybody was telling some story or another, and that's really where I learned how to be a writer, even more so than those academic pursuits.
Yeah, interesting. I'm also curious to know, and I'm here I am flipping it on you because I'm a podcaster, so I've got the questions, right? Do you find that what's helped you as a writer, as far as your reading goes, the reading that has helped you as a writer, was that reading more come to you through your studies in school as you studied, or your own reading that you did on your own as you were either studying the craft of writing or just reading for pleasure? Does that make sense?
That does make sense. The as much as I love John Milton and John Donne and and those people I got my PhD in, I don't know that I in terms of putting sentences together, I really didn't learn from that. I guess there are certainly ways of thinking about the world that have shaped me and have shaped my writing that it seems strange to say it, but there are ways that Paradise Lost influenced The Bark of the Bog Owl, which is funny to say out loud, but but that's true enough. But what I love about Paradise Lost is not what it's done for my writing so much as just what it's done for the way I think about the world. And the way I think about the world makes its way into my writing.
Right.
Yeah, but in terms of learning to write, it certainly I learned more from non-academic pursuits. Flannery O'Connor is a big one, and while I was introduced to Flannery O'Connor in an academic setting, the huge majority of my Flannery O'Connor reading was not in an academic setting. I read 2 or 3 Flannery O'Connor stories in school, and I've read everything else that she wrote outside of school.
Okay, so and I was asking that question kind of selfishly. I have a couple of high schoolers who want to be writers and pursue writing when they're graduated and studying college and beyond. And as I've been looking at curriculum for them, learning, in our homeschool, their literature curriculum, whatever. One thing I have just observed as a writer, looking at writing curriculum, is it feels to me like the writing curriculum and the reading that is like suggested by writers is of a different caliber entirely than maybe what is like a writing curriculum written by teachers. And I really just think there's like a different kind of a set of skills that you need to write, a 5-paragraph essay for your classroom than there is for you to write something that might show up in the New Yorker that people would actually read of their own free will, not because they had to, So that's interesting to me because I have noticed it's kind of this balance of trying to figure out how much reading should you do for your schoolwork versus how much reading do you just get to pick and do because you're learning your craft. And for me, I feel like almost everything I've learned about good writing has come through my own interest-led reading and writing and studying of the craft itself. But I wasn't sure if that was, true for you too. So that's interesting to hear. Yeah.
Yeah, and I listen to Selected Shorts, that podcast. I listen to the New Yorker fiction podcasts. I find those very helpful, and not even because I now end up writing like the people in the New Yorker, because a lot of times I'm not crazy about those stories, but nevertheless, those are people who are writing. The people I'm writing for are not the people who lived in the 17th century. Like I don't even have the option of writing for people in the 17th century, and so and so it really is the as much as I love 17th century poetry, I didn't learn too much about how to write from that.
Yeah.
So you've alluded to the fact that you, besides being a read aloud maven, you also write. Did the Read Aloud revival come first, or did the books? Your first book come first?
The writing came first. The first book came first, and really, so I've done 2 published books. One is called Teaching from Rest, and it's a book for homeschooling moms. The second is called The Read Aloud Family, which is for parents who want to connect with their kids through books. The Teaching from Rest came first, and that was really it kind of started as a collection of essays, which showed up as blog posts as I was kind of working through some ideas of like how to homeschool your kids without all the anxiety that kind of comes with it. And that really it was so interesting as a writer, like how that experience has changed. I wrote that book when my 5th and 6th children are twins, and when they were just a few months old. Yeah. And so I had nothing else to do, right, except to write a book.
Right, nothing else to do.
Yeah. What I did is I actually think I needed these like 15-minute, like where I could get lost in my own project that wasn't babies and diapers and motherhood, and think through some of the things that I was struggling with. And so that actually ended up being how I wrote the entire book. I really wrote that whole book in, 15-minute chunks here and there around baby toddlerness. And then the read aloud, and then Read Aloud Revival kind of was created and grew to what it is, a lot closer to what it is now, in between that and my next book, which came out in 2018. Yeah. And those are both those are both adult nonfiction.
Yeah. Yeah. But you're also been working on some picture books for juveniles.
I've been working on some picture books. This is sort of my big scary thing I'm doing creatively right now, because it's different. It's a different kind of writing. It's more like poetry than it is like essay writing. It's a different kind of difficult, but it's energizing in all the right ways, I think. It's one of the things that's been interesting for me as I've been writing picture books and getting them critiqued and working with an agent and showing them to other authors I trust, is I'm hearing a lot more no's and start over and try again than I've ever heard with my writing before. Yeah. And it's been difficult, but it's also really, I guess energizing is the best word I can think of to describe it. It's sort of, it's almost like this kind of writing lives in a whole different part of my brain, than the writing I do for adults. I would say I feel this huge responsibility, and I bet you can understand this, Jonathan, as a person who writes books that kids read, right? Mm-hmm. I feel this huge responsibility when I'm writing books that I know are for children. I like a much greater responsibility, really, than I do when I'm writing books for their parents.
Oh, that's interesting.
And so it's been more challenging there, but it's also really life-giving. So yeah, it's been a new, interesting creative endeavor. I've not had any success with it yet, so we'll see what happens.
Well, wait a minute. Publishing success is not the same thing as success writing, right?
Okay, thank you. Yes, that is 100% true. Let me say that. I have not had any publishing success with it yet, but I'm having a lot of really fun early morning by myself, gleeful, delightful times writing them. And I am like seeing yourself improve. Like when you take a draft to the 20, you can do like a bazillion drafts in a picture book because they're short. So, so like by the time I get from draft 1 to draft 20, it's really exciting to look at where it's come from and feel like I'm getting better. It's hard sometimes to measure, am I getting better as a writer? Well, with my picture book work, I feel like I can see that a little bit more clearly, and that's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've gone from writing in 15-minute chunks, and we kind of, slid right past that. I didn't even stop you to hear more about that. But now that you said you're getting up in the morning, you're having some time. What did your 15-minute chunks, what skills did you develop in those 15-minute chunks that are helpful now? That I assume you mean in the morning you're spending more than 15 minutes, correct?
Yeah, I am. And I don't do it every morning. But when I was writing in 15-minute chunks, I would have dearly loved to have more than that. But we had 3 babies who were 2 and under, and then 3 older kids I was homeschooling. It was a little crazy. Yeah. And I really did just have like 15 minutes before I had to grab another, baby to nurse them, or they'd fallen asleep, or it's time to change a diaper, or teach another kid math. And so I trained my brain, basically. I think my brain just knew, if you don't write in this 15 minutes, like, you're not going to get a chance to write today. Yeah. Or you don't know when your next 15-minute time will come. And because there was like this limited amount of time and it was really important, I felt better when I was writing. Yeah. And I should say that book was mostly written before I realized it was going to be like a book or something that I was sharing with the world. So there was a lot of like personal therapy, I think, that was happening as I was writing that book, as far as like me working out stuff I was thinking about. Yeah. So now I think I have probably, that gave me the gift of learning to tell my brain it's time to write. Like, you have 15 minutes, go. And one of the tricks that really helps me with now is I will almost never tell myself I have to write for more than 15 minutes. Because if I say, you have an hour, you're going to go write for an hour, I will get freaked out. Like, I'm not going to have anything to say. Yeah. It's all going to be garbage. And so I will still tell myself, even now, if I have a 4-hour time period, or in the early mornings when I have an hour, I will tell myself, all you have to do is write for 15 minutes. And so then it's like I know I'm doing it to myself, but it's like I trick my brain into thinking, you can do anything for 15 minutes. And as soon as your 15 minutes is over, you can go scroll Facebook. But then when my 15 minutes is over, I don't want to scroll Facebook, because now I did the hard part of starting, and I'm usually kind of not always, but I'm usually kind of in a mojo, you've got your flow going, or at least you're in the mode. So it's easier to keep going than it is to stop. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great insight. And I often say, nobody writes books, they write sentences and paragraphs. And
I love it. I love it when you say that. I had that on a sticky note on my computer for a while.
Oh, good. I didn't realize that was so repetitive.
Sarah, you just have to write a sentence.
Yeah, right. And when you go running, the question isn't, can I run 4 miles a day? It's, can I run to that next telephone pole? And you probably can.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. And by the way, I can't. I need to circle back around to something this moment of brilliance that you threw out there, and then we just kept going, and that is the idea of accepting the limitations that you're in the middle of instead of resisting them, because those limitations. If what you want to do is to quit, then there you go. You got your excuse. But if you work with those limitations, within those limitations, and demonstrate to yourself that you can do it, good things start to happen. In the last hour that I record these podcasts in batches, and so the last hour before you, I was talking to the singer-songwriter J.J. Heller, and she was talking about how she has a polyp on one of her vocal cords, so she can't sing loud. And so she got in the lullaby writing and singing business, and it turns out that's her sweet spot, right? At least for right now.
Huh.
And you had 15 minutes, so you wrote within those
Yeah.
limitations. I love it.
Yeah. Well, and even now, the limitations look a little different. So I have more than 15 minutes. I can get up early as long as I'm not sacrificing sleep. So, I don't always get up. I'm not like the most consistent person on the face of the planet. But I think realizing, okay, in my season of life right now, I homeschool my kids for the first half of the day. I work at on my Read Aloud Revival work for the second half of the day. Mm-hmm. So I have early mornings or a special Saturday, where I sneak away at the cafe or something to do my writing. And that constraint itself and this may just be a personality thing too, but it really does help me go like, if this is something I want to do, and it is, then that's where I've got to fit it. Mm-hmm. And it's just surprising to me how much we can do when we, instead of fighting and going like, I will be a writer when my kids are grown, or when the kids are in school all day, or when I have a 2-hour chunk every day, or when I can write first thing in the morning. We can give ourselves all kinds of like idealistic, when this happens, then I can do the thing I want to do, or we can just do it. Yeah. If it's any good. And it might not be. A lot of times I feel like, those 15-minute chunks, a lot of that just got thrown away, never showed up in the book, or never seen the light of day, but it was still worthwhile. So, something you just said about how you don't write a book, you write sentences. I was talking to the author, Gary Schmidt, who's one of my very favorite middle grade and YA authors. Mm-hmm. Actually, he's written for all ages, but he told me he types on a typewriter. And he said the reason he does it, because at the end of every line, it goes ding, and then it goes. And he said it feels like, good job, do it again. Wow. And I am like, oh my goodness, that is exactly what we need as writers, is like, you write a sentence, and even if it's not any good, you just go, good job, now do it again, and do it again. And you can come back and fix it later, but keep doing it, Now that's what I need to tape to my desk. Good job, do it again. Okay. Every time you put a period down.
Now this is you just gave me the transition I was looking for. In your work with the Read Aloud Revival, you end up talking to some of your favorite writers, some of the best writers who are alive. Certainly the best writers of children's books who are alive. Wait a minute, that was a weird thing. That sounded like I was putting writers of children's book as if they didn't count as writers. I mean, some of the best writers alive who also happen to be children's writers. You did something with Sally Lloyd Jones earlier this week. I mean, she's one of my all-time favorite writers. And what's that like to go from, okay, I'm hanging out with, I am having conversations with Gary Schmidt, and now I think I'll go write a children's book myself. You know what I'm saying? That could be that could be daunting for some people.
It is, and I will tell you, it's been a special kind of challenge, and I wonder if I've set myself up to make the act of writing for children, especially, more difficult than it needed to be. I was in New England last year, and I had breakfast with Jeannie Birdsall, who's the author of the Tenderwicks books, which are some of my favorites.
Oh, what great books!
And they're so good, so good. And she told me, when we went to her independent bookstore after breakfast, we're like poking around, handing each other books. It was so fun. Have you read this one yet? And she said, I haven't read a lot of these because I really try to guard myself from reading too much and letting other things, influence, or she said, make her feel insecure because, she sees this other author who's this award-winning, keeps winning all these awards. And then your brain just kind of naturally goes like, what am I not doing that author's doing that I should be doing? And she said, Sarah, that's going to be interesting because I had talked to her about writing for children. And she said, that's going to be an interesting challenge for you because you are this is what I do at Read Aloud Revival. I read ridiculous amounts of middle grade and picture books mostly.
Yeah.
And try to find the very best of the best and then talk to their authors. And then I sit down and try to write. And I think all writers, we all have a hard time not comparing our terrible first drafts, middle drafts, 10th drafts with other people's finished drafts, right?
Yeah.
But because of what I'm doing by reading so much of this best stuff and trying to find this best stuff, this best writing for children, I feel like it's like almost exacerbated a little bit that
yeah.
struggle between my work, which was definitely not Kate DiCamillo work, and then the 8 books I just read by Kate DiCamillo in that interview I just had with her. And I think, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
So there's sort of like this little Newbery Award-winning author on my shoulder who's looking over me when I'm writing, going like, really? You think so, Sarah? I don't know.
Yeah. I'm glad I don't know what Kate DiCamillo's voice sounds like because I would be hearing it, in my when I was trying to write.
But she's the sweetest. So actually, I would love it if she would snoop my shoulder.
It's amazing how often her name comes up in these conversations, these podcast episodes when I'm asking writers to talk about their favorite writers. Man, she's she's a treasure.
Well, and when I've loved her work and I've read her things on writing and listened to little snippets she's talked about writing here and there. But when I interviewed her, I was just sort of gobsmacked. I think I'm actually talking to a genius. I mean, she just has this really soul deep understanding is not the right word, like call or something, mission to telling really good stories and leaving this generation of children with hope. And it's just compelling. So I would welcome her. If she ever wants, Kate, if you're listening to this and you ever want to come sit over my shoulder while I'm writing, I will give you any snack you want and you can come over and watch me write.
Well, here's hoping Kate DiCamillo listens to the Habit podcast. I don't have any reason to believe that's true, but
but one can always hope.
One can always hope. That's right. Okay, last question. Who are the writers who make you want to write?
Oh, I love this question because there's such a difference between like just my favorite writers and then writers who, when I put their books down, go, I got to write something. I got to do that. I got to try to do that. I got to try to do something kind of like that. Okay, so there's a couple. And I mostly because my brain has been working more on writing for children. That's kind of where my creative energy is towards. So the first people that come to mind are indeed Jeannie Birdsall, who wrote the Penderwicks, Karina Yan Glaser. So I don't know if you've read these yet, Jonathan.
I don't know these books.
Okay, the Vanderbeekers. There's the Vanderbeekers of 141st Street, Vanderbeekers in the Hidden Garden. There's a new one coming out this year called the Vanderbeekers to the Rescue. I think there's going to be 2 more.
You know what? Like I think in my mind that was more Jeannie Birdsall books. I didn't realize that was something different.
They're very similar. They have a similar tone and feel. And those are the kind, they're like big family. So the Vanderbeekers are this biracial family that lives in Harlem, and all the siblings have to band together to help their family, like, through a pickle, which is kind of this old school, like Eleanor Estes, Elizabeth Enright. You've got like a bunch of siblings and their parents, and the siblings kind of have to band together to help the family do something, and then they end up getting themselves into more trouble. I love those stories. I love them so much.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like the Penderwicks too. And so I think those big family stories where they're like trying to work together, but you've got all these personalities that butt up against each other. It's so much like my real life that I don't know. I love it so much. Those are the books that make me want to write a middle grade novel.
Yeah.
But picture book wise, Barbara Cooney always takes the cake for me. She wrote Miss Rumphius, and she's an illustrator and an author. So there were some that she wrote and some she wrote and illustrated. And then Sarah Stewart is another one that really makes me want to write.
Okay.
So she writes the picture books like The Gardener and The Library, and they're I don't know. The Gardener's one we've been reading a lot this month, and it's like this epistolary picture book that there's so many layers. It's like a sweet picture book that you just think if you can do this in like 500 words and you can leave me at the end of the book thinking I got to go back and read for that second layer that I just picked up on. It's just, I don't know how to describe it except to say that there's something about picture books that is magic of what you can do in 500 words and keep kids and their parents coming back for more again and again. That's the kind of magic I want in on it.
Yeah, right.
I want in on.
Yeah. You mentioned Eleanor Estes. She wrote 100 Dresses, right? Is that Eleanor Estes?
Yes. Yep.
That book amazes me.
I need to read that one aloud with my kids. I haven't read that one aloud to them, I don't think.
Yeah. Yeah, I am crazy about that book. And that's the only Eleanor Estes book I've read. Well, Sarah, it has been it's always a joy to spend any kind of time with you, even if it's on the phone. And so thank you for being on the Habit Podcast. And as I already said, thank you for the work you're doing for families and for authors and for the culture of reading aloud. I really appreciate what you're doing.
Oh, Jonathan, thank you so much. And the feeling is mutual. Your habit email that you send out each week is one of the very few that I bookmark and tag if I can't read it right when it comes in, because I'm going to read it 100% sure. They're so helpful.
Well, thanks.
So
I'm
I really
glad to hear
appreciate the work you're doing too.
All right. Thanks, Sarah. Talk to you soon.
You're welcome. Okay. Bye-bye.
The Rabbit Room has partnered with Lipscomb University to make this podcast possible. Lipscomb has graciously given us access to their recording studio and the Center for Entertainment and Arts building. We're so grateful for their sponsorship, their encouragement, and the good work they do in Nashville. Special shout out as well to the Arcadian Wild for allowing us to use their delightful song Finch in the Pantry as part of this podcast. Check out their album of the same name for more excellent music.
The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
This podcast was produced by The Rabbit Room, a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to fostering Christ-centered community and spiritual formation through music, story, and art. All our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com, and to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.